Chapter 1. The Blue Cross. Between the silver ribbon of morning and the green glittering ribbon of sea, the male passengers of the Julie Verne sprang up on deck to see a little Lizzie boat, like a white gull, come dancing over the foam of the channel. It was waked with the mournful whistle which is the sea's morning prayer, and the natty French sailor who was leaning over the rail looked pleased to find that he was in the hands of the noble English nation, which he had always admired so much. Among the crowd were the two strange figures that stood out. One was an immense man, almost obese. He had a black curly head, a black beard cut square, and black clothes that seemed to be covered with ashes. He had the look of a man who had been fattened on invisible meals. His companion was a small man, a Roman Catholic priest, who seemed to be swamped in his huge coat and cloak. He was very short. His face was round and smooth like a baby's, except for a big nose. His eyes were also rather large and startlingly blue. The big man was talking with great fluency in French, for he was the famous criminal Flambeau. The little priest said very little, and that little was said in English. Yet somehow he did not seem to be an Englishman. His clothes had a foreign cut, and his manner had a foreign caution. He was, in fact, Father Brown, of the Essex village of Cobhole, one of those strange wandering priests who gave more intelligence to the police than all the detectives. As the boat stopped at the pier, the big man called Flambeau suddenly seemed to lose all his smiles and his tongue. He looked about him anxiously, and the little priest, who had hitherto been simply looking over the side, looked up at him and said quietly, "I think you're looking for something." The other did not answer. Father Brown went on, "I think you're wondering whether we're being watched, but I don't think we are." Flambeau laughed, but he was still uneasy. He walked down the gangway ahead of the little priest. When they were in the street, Flambeau paused a moment, and then said abruptly, "Father Brown, do you know who I am?" "Yes," said the priest, "you are Flambeau." The other looked at him with an expression almost of fear. "Then why did you bring me to this city?" "To save your soul," said Father Brown simply. Flambeau stared, then he burst out laughing again. "And what do you think you can do with me?" "I've done it," said Father Brown quietly. He held up his hand. In it glittered the blue cross, the famous relic he had been carrying secretly to Paris. Flambeau sprang at him, but something in the priest's steady eyes froze him where he stood. "I knew you would try something," said Father Brown cheerfully. "I only wondered what." "How did you know?" Flambeau muttered. "By a dozen things," said the priest cheerfully. "You attacked reason, and that is bad tactics for a criminal. And finally, because you forgot to wrap up your knives." Flambeau collapsed on a bench. "Are you going to give me to the police?" "No," said Father Brown. "I want you to give yourself to God." And it is written in the police records of Paris that the great criminal Flambeau vanished that day, and a detective named Valentine found a crushed knife in the gutter and a blue cross shining in the priest's pocket.
Chapter 2. The Secret Garden. Arthur Sloane, the English diplomat, was exceedingly fond of giving garden parties in Paris. He had a large and beautiful house with a large and beautiful garden. He had money, rank, and influence, and he was exceedingly fond of showing them. In short, he fancied himself as a figure in society, and did everything in his power to justify that fancy. On an afternoon in late summer, a large and brilliant group of diplomats, officers, politicians, and literary people filled his lawn. The sun made the white gravel almost glare and threw patterns of shade through the branches of the big plane trees. Among the guests was a man whose presence attracted much attention, Monsieur Valentine, the celebrated head of the Paris police, whose gray, lean face and quiet, sharp eyes were famous in every newspaper in Europe. Valentine wandered about the garden, looking at everything with a curious eye, yet seeming indifferent to all. There was one other man also remarkable, a small, brown, shabbily dressed Catholic priest who walked simply and silently about the garden, occasionally looking around him with blinking eyes. This was Father Brown. A few people noticed him with a smile, and one lady said, "That little priest seems quite lost here." Valentine overheard her and said quietly, "He is not lost, he is just looking." Before the lady could answer, an uproar broke out near the center of the garden. A group of servants and guests were running across the grass with cries of fear. Valentine ran forward, and Father Brown followed him. There, near a small summer house, lay the body of a tall, dark-haired French nobleman, Count Paul, a young man well known in society. He was stretched out on the grass, dead, with a small, curious wound in his throat. A doctor bent over him. "He has been murdered," he said. "Killed with a very thin, sharp blade, almost like a stiletto." Valentine's face did not change. He looked steadily at the body, then at the ground around it. There were no footprints, no signs of struggle. It seemed as if the man had been stabbed in a locked room, except that the room was a wide-open garden. "What weapon was used?" someone asked. Valentine shrugged. "We shall see, when we find it." But they did not find it. The garden was surrounded by a high wall. The house had been full of guests. No stranger could have entered without being seen, yet no guest appeared suspicious. "It is impossible," murmured a general. "It is inexplicable," said a politician. Valentine turned suddenly to the little priest. "Father Brown," he said calmly, "what do you think?" Father Brown blinked. "Well, I think there's something wrong about the garden gate." They all stared. "The garden gate?" repeated Valentine sharply. Father Brown nodded, pointing at the small side gate in the wall. "It is shut, but not properly. Someone passed through it recently, and in great haste." Valentine ran to the gate and examined it. There were faint scratches on the lower hinge. Outside lay the quiet Paris street, empty. "He escaped," Valentine muttered. "That means the murderer came from outside, killed the Count in a crowded garden, and escaped instantly." Everyone looked confused, except Father Brown, who said quietly, "No, the murderer did not come from outside. He went outside." Valentine looked at him sharply. "Explain." Father Brown said slowly, "The killer was already inside. He came as one of the guests. He used a tiny, sharp weapon that can be hidden easily. Then he ran out through the gate because he wished to hide something." "What?" Valentine demanded. "A head," said Father Brown simply. There was a shock of horror. Valentine gasped. "You mean the murderer cut off the victim's head?" Father Brown shook his head. "No, I mean the murderer hid his own head, his own appearance. He disguised himself." The priest pointed suddenly to a tall laurel bush. Behind it lay something dark. Valentine leapt forward and dragged it out, a large false beard, sticky with spirit gum. "There," Father Brown said, "the murderer wore that beard. Once he had killed the Count, he tore it off and fled." Valentine stared. "But who?" Father Brown's blue eyes were very sad. "The murderer was the only man who would disguise himself, the man who had reason to fear recognition." His voice became very quiet. "It was Count Paul's cousin, the man who inherited his fortune." There was a long silence. Then Valentine bowed deeply to the little priest. "Father Brown," he said gravely, "you have saved the honor of French justice."
Chapter 3. The Queer Feet. If you have ever walked down the long, low colonnade that leads to the dining room of the Vernon Hotel, you will appreciate the situation. The building is one of the few hotels with a faint flavor of the old aristocratic club. The corridor is paved with black and white marble in squares, and the ceiling is supported on rows of Doric pillars.
Between the pillars are mirrors, and the whole place is lit with a soft and steady glow. Down this corridor, once a fortnight, the 12 true fishermen walk to dine. They are a small and very select company of old aristocrats devoted to the ancient art of angling. Their devotion, however, consists strictly of dining once a fortnight in this particular hotel. Their fishing is mainly metaphorical, and the Apostle Peter would scarcely recognize his successors. They walk down the corridor in procession, 2 and 2, with the grave etiquette of a court ceremony. They have dined together for 40 years, and nothing ever interrupts the ritual of the dinner. Nothing, until the night on which the story begins. The head waiter of the Vernon Hotel was a Frenchman named Gustave. He had the dignity of an ambassador. To serve the 12 true fishermen was the pride of his life. To him it was not a dinner, but a sacrament. And this night, as the tables were being prepared, Gustave discovered that a silver soup spoon was missing. It was one of the special silver spoons of the fishermen, a pattern made only for them, bearing their badge of a fish on the handle. Gustave went white. No one had ever lost a piece of the fisherman's silver. It was a kind of crime against the state. He rushed through the hotel, searching everywhere, questioning every servant. At last, wild with worry, he opened a side door and collided with a small, shabby Roman Catholic priest. The priest was Father Brown. "I beg your pardon," said Gustave, distracted. "I seek something I cannot find." "So do I," said the little priest cheerfully. "I am looking for a dying man." Gustave stared. The priest explained that he had been called to give last rites to an Italian hotel worker who had fallen dangerously ill. Gustave, though almost beside himself over the missing silver, immediately led the priest to the servants' quarters. After Father Brown had done his duty and returned, he found Gustave still pacing like a panther. "Something is missing?" asked the priest. "A spoon," cried Gustave. "A silver spoon from the fisherman's service." Father Brown listened quietly. "They are dining tonight, are they not? The great procession soon begins," he asked. Gustave nodded miserably. "And the corridor is cleared during their supper?" "Yes, no one may pass." Father Brown's mild eyes sharpened. "Then someone has passed who should not," he said. "Someone who has queer feet." At that moment the first murmur of the approaching procession could be heard, the slow and rhythmic footsteps of the 12 true fishermen. Tap, 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 tap. Father Brown held up a hand. "Listen, these men have walked together for years. Their footsteps fall in perfect time, but tonight, listen carefully." Gustave listened. Cap, tap, 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 scrape, tap, tap. "There," cried Father Brown. "Someone in that procession is not one of the fishermen. His footfall is different." Gustave's jaw dropped. But how could he join them? How? Father Brown smiled. He simply dressed as one of the waiters, then slipped into the gap as they passed. He knew no one would look closely. The dignity of the ceremony is too great. "A thief walking with the fishermen?" gasped Gustave. "Yes," said Father Brown, carrying that heavy silver spoon in his pocket. "That is why his steps sound uneven." The procession reached the dining room doors. The guests entered. Father Brown stepped quietly behind them and whispered to Gustave, "Which one is new to your eyes?" Gustave looked anxiously. Suddenly he pointed. "That man! I do not know him." He indicated a tall, elegant fellow with a pale face and restless eyes, a man dressed perfectly for dinner, but sweating slightly at the temples. Father Brown moved softly towards him. Just then the man broke and ran. His footsteps echoed wildly down the marble corridor, no longer slow or ceremonial, but sharp, frantic, and uneven. The queer feet. Father Brown and several waiters chased him. At the end of the corridor the thief slipped. The silver spoon clattered from his coat. He was caught. When they brought him back, panting and humiliated, he glared at Father Brown. How did you know?" he demanded. Father Brown's round, innocent face looked almost sorry for him. "You didn't have the right feet," he said simply. "When you pretended to be solemn, you walked fast. When you pretended to be fast, you walked solemn. That is how thieves always walk when they're trying to hide something." He picked up the silver spoon and handed it to Gustave.
"Take care of it," he said gently. "To the fisherman it is sacred." Then he turned to the thief. "My son, there is still time to save your soul." And with that, the little priest walked away, leaving the corridors silent once more.
Chapter 4. The Flying Stars. It was Christmas Eve, and the snow that had begun to fall earlier in the afternoon now laid in a thick white blanket across the countryside. A cheerful fire burned in the drawing room of Colonel Cray's house, where a small holiday party had gathered. Among them was Father Brown, invited as a friend of the family. Also present was a lively young man named Flambeau, though at this time he was known not as a criminal, but as a charming athlete and performer who made everyone laugh. There was, however, an unusual seriousness in the colonel's manner, for tonight in his house were kept the famous jewels known as the Flying Stars. They were rare diamonds belonging to the colonel's niece, Miss Ruby Adams, who was to inherit them on her coming of age. Because they were so valuable, the colonel had arranged a private little drama for the amusement of the guests. He would hide the diamonds in the house and challenge everyone to find them. It was meant as a game, though he alone knew how real the danger might be. The merriment began when a troupe of children's mummers arrived, masked performers dressed as clowns, kings, animals, and fairies. They brought music and noise and filled the house with harmless chaos. In the midst of this excitement, the colonel whispered to Father Brown, "I don't trust some of the people here. There are men in England who would steal the Flying Stars if they knew they were in my pocket." Father Brown nodded calmly. "Then do not keep them in your pocket." The colonel looked startled. He had indeed been carrying the diamonds on his person. "Where should I keep them?" he asked. "Somewhere so obvious," said the priest, "that a thief would never expect it." But before the colonel could ask further, the children rushed in again, dragging him to the dining room to begin the feast. Among the guests was a young man named Arthur, secretly in love with Ruby Adams. He could barely speak to her, but she understood and encouraged him shyly. Their quiet affection was obvious to Father Brown, who smiled gently whenever he saw the two together. The food was served, the wine flowed, and everyone laughed as the mummers acted out their silly little play. But the peace was broken by a sudden commotion. A mummer, masked, short, and dressed in harlequin colors, ran into the room shouting, "Thief! Thief! Someone has stolen something from me!" Everyone jumped to their feet. The harlequin pointed at the window. "I saw a man slip out just now. He ran toward the garden." Instantly, half the guests rushed outside into the snow. Father Brown did not move. A few minutes later, Ruby screamed, "The Flying Stars! They're gone!" She had tried to show the diamonds to a friend, only to discover that the case in which they were kept was empty. Panic swept through the house. The colonel shouted orders, the servants searched the garden, the guests ran through the hallways, but Father Brown remained sitting quietly in a chair, watching the mummers. Only Flambeau noticed. "You don't seem worried, Father," he said. "Oh, I am, but not about the jewels." "Then what?" "I'm worried about souls," replied the priest gently. At last, when everyone was exhausted and breathless, Father Brown stood and addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have been looking for the thief in the snow outside, but the thief never went outside." A silence fell. The man who shouted, "Thief! Thief!" the harlequin mummer, was the thief himself. Ruby gasped. The colonel stared. Flambeau stepped forward, his eyes bright. "And how do you know that, Father?" Father Brown smiled at him. "Because a man who really has had something stolen does not shout about it before checking his pockets. It was a performance, a distraction." He pointed to the harlequin's costume bag that lay near the wall. "The diamonds are in that bag." The room erupted. The colonel leapt toward the bag.
opened it and held up the flying stars. "Father Brown," he cried, "how did you guess?" The little priest gave a tiny shrug. "Because whenever there is noise, look for the quiet man, and whenever there is confusion, look for the man who caused it." But then something strange happened. Father Brown turned to Flambeau. "My friend, I know who the thief is, and so do you." Flambeau froze. The silence fell again. Father Brown continued, "You are very clever, Flambeau. You threw suspicion on the Harlequin when you took the stars from him. You planned to escape with them after the chase." Gasps spread through the guests. Flambeau smiled slowly, almost sadly. "Well, it seems the little priest has caught me." Father Brown approached him quietly. "You are a good man, a brave man, a man who could do great things if you only stop stealing other people's Christmas gifts." Flambeau stared at him, moved and confused. And then, after a long pause, he handed over the diamonds. The guests cheered. The colonel grasped the priest's hands in gratitude. Ruby smiled through tears, and Arthur, emboldened by the evening's drama, finally confessed his love to her. Flambeau slipped out quietly into the snowy night, but Father Brown knew that one day Flambeau would return, not as a thief, but as a friend.
Chapter 5. The Invisible Man. A man named John Turnbull Angus, an inventor, lived in a quiet London street. He had made a remarkable discovery and kept it secret, but secretly feared that someone would try to steal it. He often told his friend, Father Brown, that he believed he was being watched, followed, hunted by someone no one else had ever seen. "The man who is after me," Angus whispered once, "is invisible." Father Brown didn't laugh. He simply said, "Tell me what you mean by invisible." But Angus never explained clearly. He only repeated that the man was unseen, unheard, unnoticed. Then tragedy struck. One morning, Angus's fiancée, Laura Hope, sent a desperate message to Father Brown. "John is dead, murdered." The priest hurried to her house, where a small group had gathered. Laura Hope, pale with shock, Mr. Isidore Smythe, her suitor before Angus, Major Brown, a friend, the police inspector. They explained what had happened. Angus had been shot dead inside his own room. No one had seen anyone enter or leave. No weapon was found. No footprints, no forced doors, no windows open. The inspector was baffled. It's as if the murderer was invisible. Father Brown nodded slowly. "People are seen," he said, "because other people expect to see them, and people are unseen if no one expects them." The others did not understand yet. The inspector took Father Brown to the crime scene. The room was small, tidy, and locked from the inside. Angus lay slumped in a chair, shot through the heart. There was only one strange clue. A tiny pile of letters lay on the floor near the door, as if someone had dropped them. Father Brown picked them up thoughtfully. "You say the murderer never left the house?" he asked. "It's impossible that he did," the inspector replied. Father Brown shook his head. "Oh, he left. He walked past your very eyes. You simply didn't see him." The next clue came from Laura Hope. She said that Angus had been tortured for days by mysterious letters, threats from someone who claimed he would steal his invention. "Did you ever see the man who delivered these letters?" asked Father Brown. "No," said Laura. "The letters were always found on the mat. Perhaps the postman." Father Brown's eyes lit up. "Exactly." He hurried out the front door and stared up and down the street. "What do you see?" asked the inspector. "Nothing," said Father Brown, "and that is the point." The street was completely empty. No pedestrians, no vendors, no visitors.
Only one figure ever walked this street regularly, the postman, an ordinary-looking man in an ordinary red coat carrying an ordinary bag. So ordinary, in fact, that no one ever looked at him twice. "No one notices the postman," Father Brown said quietly. "No one remembers his face. He is the one person in London who is truly invisible." The inspector gasped. "You mean—" "Yes," said Father Brown. "The postman delivered the threatening letters. He entered Angus's house as a postman. He left the same way, and no one stopped him." They raced to the post office. There they found the postman, a thin, pale man with nervous eyes. He tried to run. He was caught. In his coat was the small pistol used to kill Angus. He broke down and confessed. He had envied Angus's invention and believed he had a right to it. He threatened him, then stole a key to Angus's house and shot him. As Father Brown had said, he walked out the front door in his uniform, unnoticed. Laura Hope wept, but Father Brown comforted her gently. "There are no invisible men," he said softly, "only men whom others refuse to see."
Chapter 6. It was a quiet evening in a small English village when the parish priest, Father Brown, was visited by a stranger. The man's eyes were wild with fear and his clothes disordered, as if he had fled from some grave danger. "My name is Count Flambeau," the man said, "and I am being hunted for a crime I did not commit." Father Brown listened attentively. Though he had never known Flambeau personally, he recognized him as a man of strong will and sharp intellect, yet he suspected that the young nobleman had been led into mischief by pride and impatience. The stranger continued, "I have been accused of stealing a priceless jewel, the moon crescent. I swear, Father, I never touched it, yet every trace leads to me. I cannot trust the police. I need your help." Father Brown smiled gently. "You are in the right place, Flambeau," he said. "Let us consider calmly what has happened." The Count explained that the moon crescent was a rare jewel kept in the house of an old baron. Flambeau had been present at a gala where the jewel was displayed. Later, when the jewel disappeared, the servants, seeing Flambeau near the display, assumed he was the thief. Witnesses corroborated the claim, yet inconsistencies puzzled the police. Father Brown asked questions slowly and with great care, noting every gesture, every pause. He examined the jewel's case, the floor, and the surrounding furniture. Finally, the priest's eyes twinkled. "The jewel has not left the house," he said. "It has been hidden in plain sight." Flambeau looked confused. "By whom?" he asked. "By a clever hand," replied Father Brown, "but not by you. The thief relied on the assumption that everyone looks where they expect the object to be, not where it would be least expected." Father Brown led Flambeau to a tall bookshelf in the baron's study. Behind a row of heavy tomes, he reached into a hollow space and drew out a small velvet pouch. Inside gleamed the moon crescent. "See," said Father Brown, "the thief counted on our assumptions. No one thinks to check the library books. They look only in drawers and cabinets." Flambeau's eyes widened in astonishment. "You've cleared my name, Father." The priest smiled quietly. "Sometimes the greatest miracles occur not in heavens, but in the quiet observation of human nature." The village was peaceful once again, and Flambeau left, humbled and grateful. Father Brown returned to his simple duties, the miracle of insight having saved the innocent once more. Chapter 7. The Queer Feet. The story opens on a dimly lit London street near the foggy docks. A wealthy gentleman, Mr. Smithers, had recently reported a series of thefts in his household. Small items, curious objects, nothing of great value, yet enough to alarm him. The local police were puzzled. No doors had been forced, no windows broken, and yet the objects disappeared one by one. Even servants swore they saw nothing. It was at this point that Father Brown became involved, summoned by the gentleman's worried cousin. Father Brown examined the house quietly, noting details that escaped the eyes of others. Slight scratches on the polished wooden floor, tiny indentations in the carpet near the door, footsteps that did not match any servant or household member. "Someone has been here who does not belong," said Father Brown. "Their feet are queer. They tread with intent, but also with caution. They take care not to touch the floor in the expected manner." The gentleman frowned. "Queer feet? What do you mean?" Father Brown smiled faintly. "Observe and listen, and you will know. Every thief leaves his signature, not in the object stolen, but in the way he moves." That evening, the household gathered for tea. Father Brown remained silent, observing the movements of the servants, the family, and occasional visitors. He noticed one young man whose tread was peculiar, each step slightly uneven, almost as if he were trying to step in rhythm with a phantom beat no one else could hear. "The thief is among us," Father Brown whispered. "The one who walks differently, who tries to adjust to every movement of others. Look at his feet, watch his hands." Sure enough, as tea was served, Father Brown saw the young man glance toward a side table, then discreetly slip something into his coat. The action was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet to Father Brown's trained eye it was as clear as day. Later, Father Brown confronted the young man privately. "I know about your thefts," he said gently. "You have been taking small things because you wanted to test your cleverness. Yet cleverness alone is not wisdom." The young man was astonished. "How did you know?" Father Brown shook his head. "Because your feet betrayed you. You move as though the floor were alive and watching you. Only a guilty conscience would step so carefully." Ashamed, the young man confessed fully, returning all stolen objects. Father Brown forgave him quietly and offered guidance on honesty and conscience. The story concludes with Father Brown reflecting on human nature. It is not always the eyes that see the crime, nor the hands that commit it, but the feet that reveal the truth. Even in the quietest motions, a guilty heart leaves its trace.
Chapter 8. The Flying Stars. It was the first night of the annual gathering of the 12 True Fishermen, a private society of English gentlemen devoted to angling, in the quiet seaside town of Rye. The dinner had been arranged in the grand hall of the Vernon Hotel, and the guests were arriving in formal procession. Among the guests was the small, unassuming Catholic priest, Father Brown, whose presence always caused a mixture of curiosity and respect. He had been invited not for his social standing, but for his subtle wisdom and insight into human nature, which even the most worldly gentlemen valued. The 12 True Fishermen were discussing fishing techniques, the quality of local rivers, and the intricacies of bait, but Father Brown's attention was elsewhere. He noticed the servants moving silently, the glint of silver cutlery, and most importantly, the subtle nervousness of one of the guests, a tall man in black, who seemed out of place in both dress and demeanor. As the evening progressed, a commotion arose. The silver box containing the flying stars, a set of rare, brilliantly cut jewels, was found to be missing. The guests were aghast. Such theft was unheard of among the 12 True Fishermen. Father Brown calmly observed the reactions of each guest, noting subtle gestures. One man's hand trembled slightly as he raised his glass. Another kept glancing at the door, though no one had entered. The tall man in black, however, remained outwardly calm, yet his footsteps made a peculiar, uneven rhythm across the polished floor. Father Brown whispered to the hotel manager, "Notice the steps. The guilty walks differently." The manager frowned. "Steps? "Yes," said Father Brown, "guilty conscience always alters the gate. Observe closely." While the other guests were distracted, the tall man in black attempted to leave discreetly through a side corridor. Father Brown quietly intercepted him. "You have the flying stars," said the priest softly. The man started. I don't know what you mean." Father Brown smiled gently. "You walked as though the floor were alive, hiding your movements. I have observed you long enough to know the truth." Realizing that his deception was discovered, the man confessed immediately. He had been hired to steal the jewels by a wealthy rival of one of the fishermen, intending to sow distrust among the society. Father Brown retrieved the flying stars and returned them to the astonished guests. The society members were amazed at the priest's insight and his gentle yet unerring sense of justice. As the night ended, Father Brown reflected on the evening's lesson. It is not always the eyes that catch the guilty, nor the hands that reveal the crime, but the quiet, unobserved movements, the feet that betray a man's heart. Even in high society, the truth is always visible to those who watch closely. Chapter 9. The Oracle of the Dog. It was a cold, misty evening in a quiet English village when Father Brown arrived at the house of Sir John Radcliffe, an elderly baronet who prided himself on his collection of rare animals and curiosities. Among his most treasured possessions was a remarkable hound named Cerberus, trained with extraordinary intelligence and often called the Oracle of the Dog by those who admired its unusual instincts. Sir John was agitated. "Father Brown," he said, "I need your help. There is a mystery in my household that no one can solve. Something is wrong. I feel a theft is imminent, and yet the thief is clever, leaving no trace." Father Brown, his calm eyes observing the trembling hands and anxious face of the baronet, asked, "What makes you certain of a theft?" "The dog," said Sir John. "Cerberus has been restless for days, barking at shadows, growling at visitors, and refusing to enter certain rooms. But no one else sees anything. No one understands him but me." Father Brown studied the dog carefully. Cerberus was indeed restless, pacing the floor, sniffing at corners, and occasionally growling low in its throat. The priest knelt down, speaking gently to the animal, and noted the subtle changes in its behavior. "Dogs are rarely wrong," Father Brown said quietly. "They see and sense what humans cannot. If the dog is disturbed, there must be cause." That evening, as guests arrived for Sir John's dinner party, the priest watched. Among the crowd was a young man of elegant appearance who moved about with a forced calm, his eyes continually scanning the room. Cerberus stiffened whenever he came near. Father Brown noted the young man's subtle gestures, his nervous glance toward the display case containing Sir John's most precious jewels. Later, during the meal, Cerberus jumped onto the floor suddenly, growling at the guest. The young man turned pale and excused himself. He claimed he was feeling unwell, but Father Brown, smiling softly, followed him discreetly. The priest observed the man attempting to enter the room where the jewels were kept. Father Brown quietly intercepted him, speaking gently. "You have been planning to take the jewels, have you not?" The young man froze. "How do you know?" Father Brown indicated the dog. "Your own nerves betrayed you, but the dog confirms it. The oracle has spoken." Overcome by shame, the young man confessed. He had hoped to steal the jewels and flee unnoticed, relying on everyone's distraction. But the clever observation of Father Brown and the keen instincts of Cerberus had foiled him. The jewels were returned safely, the household relieved. Sir John thanked Father Brown profusely. The priest's blue eyes twinkled with quiet amusement. Sometimes we rely too much on our own senses and forget that nature itself can guide us. The truth is often in the simplest things: a dog, a glance, a small gesture. Observe closely, and the oracle will reveal it. With that, Father Brown departed quietly into the misty night, leaving the household safe and the mystery resolved.
Chapter 10. The Wrong Shape. It was in a quiet London neighborhood, in the house of Mr. Samuel Perkins, a wealthy collector of rare and curious objects, that Father Brown found himself called one chilly autumn evening. Mr. Perkins had been hosting a small dinner party, displaying a recent acquisition, an exquisitely carved ivory idol of mysterious origin. The idol, though small, had been meticulously shaped and polished, with a peculiar curve that seemed almost human. During the evening, one of the guests, Mr. Lionel Faraday, a young man of scholarly appearance but questionable character, began to examine the idol more closely than etiquette demanded. Father Brown, seated quietly in the corner, noticed his eyes linger too long on one particular feature, the curve of the idol's base. Later, as the guests were leaving, Mr. Perkins discovered that the idol was missing. Panic ensued. The servants were questioned, the guests searched, yet the idol was nowhere to be found. Father Brown observed carefully. He noted that the young scholar had been the last to handle the idol, and that his movements had been slightly awkward, as though he were hiding something in his coat. "The thief," said Father Brown quietly to Mr. Perkins, "is the man whose mind is too clever for his conscience. He will not leave traces in the ordinary places, but he will leave traces in the shape of his actions." Mr. Perkins looked puzzled. "In the shape?" "Yes," said Father Brown. "Observe the wrong shapes, the mislaid step, the awkward hand, the forced gesture. Crime cannot disguise its form entirely." Father Brown followed Mr. Faraday discreetly after the party. He observed the young man slip into a nearby alley, cautiously open his coat, and place the idol carefully inside. The priest approached quietly. "You have taken the idol," he said softly. Faraday started, then attempted to flee, but Father Brown's calm presence and quiet authority stopped him. "I meant no harm. I only wished to study it more closely. I intended to return it." Father Brown examined the idol and noted a small crack on its base, an imperfection caused by Faraday's careless handling. "You see," said the priest gently, "even the best intentions can be revealed by the wrong shape. Your carelessness betrayed you. Return it to Mr. Perkins and learn that observation is as important as curiosity." Mr. Faraday returned the idol, ashamed but wiser. Father Brown reflected on the event quietly. In every crime, every misdeed, the human form itself reveals the truth. It is in the angles, the gestures, the shapes of actions that guilt is written. One only needs to see clearly. And so, in that quiet London neighborhood, the mystery of the missing ivory idol was resolved, and Father Brown once again demonstrated that the simplest observations often reveal the deepest truths. Chapter 11. The Pointing Finger. One summer evening, Father Brown received a summons from Inspector Valentine, a police officer of great experience but limited imagination. Valentine was perplexed by a murder at the house of Mr. Henry Carswell, a wealthy art dealer in London. The victim was Mr. Malcolm Chase, a man of refined appearance and secretive habits. Chase had been discovered dead in his study, a single bullet through his heart. The window was open, the door locked from the inside, and no weapon was visible. Inspector Valentine had gathered the household, servants, guests, and family. Suspicion fell upon every person present, yet no one seemed capable of the crime. Father Brown arrived quietly, his round, pale face calm and almost forgetful in appearance. "Explain to me," said Father Brown to Valentine, "what do you mean by suspicion?" Valentine gestured helplessly. "Everyone here had opportunity. Everyone had motive, but no one admits anything. There is no clue." Father Brown smiled. "Then the clue is in the clue itself. One must observe not the facts, but the gestures that point to them." Father Brown examined the room. The chairs were slightly displaced. A blotter on the desk had been moved. A small finger-shaped indentation was visible on the velvet chair cushion. "The pointing finger," he whispered. "The culprit has revealed himself by his own impatience." He questioned the guests, observing their eyes, hands, and mannerisms. Finally, he focused on Mr. Reginald Pym, a seemingly calm gentleman who had been nervously twisting his ring during the entire inquiry. Father Brown asked casually, "Where were you standing when the shot was fired?" Pym hesitated. His finger twitched involuntarily, pointing toward the window. "Ah," said Father Brown quietly, "you have betrayed yourself. The finger always points where guilt lies." Confronted, Pym confessed. He had argued with Chase over a business matter. In a moment of anger, he had fired the gun and then tried to stage the room to make it appear accidental. Yet in his anxiety, he left the finger-shaped indentation, and in his gestures, he gave himself away. Valentine shook his head in wonder. "Father Brown, I never thought to see it." Father Brown replied simply, "It is not the eyes alone, Inspector, but the small signs of the human hand and conscience. The guilty hand betrays the heart." With that, the mystery of the pointing finger was solved, and justice quietly restored.
Chapter 12. The Pointing Finger. One summer evening, Father Brown received a summons from Inspector Valentin, a police officer of great experience but limited imagination. Valentin was perplexed by a murder at the house of Mr. Henry Carswell, a wealthy art dealer in London. The victim was Mr. Malcolm Chase, a man of refined appearance and secretive habits. Chase had been discovered dead in his study, a single bullet through his heart. The window was open, the door locked from the inside, and no weapon was visible. Inspector Valentin had gathered the household, servants, guests, and family. Suspicion fell upon every person present, yet no one seemed capable of the crime. Father Brown arrived quietly, his round, pale face calm and almost forgetful in appearance. "Explain to me," he said to Valentin, "what do you mean by suspicion?" Valentin gestured helplessly. "Everyone here had opportunity, everyone had motive, but no one admits anything. There is no clue." Father Brown smiled. "Then the clue is in the clue itself. One must observe not the facts, but the gestures that point to them." Father Brown examined the room. The chairs were slightly displaced. A blotter on the desk had been moved. A small finger-shaped indentation was visible on the velvet chair cushion. "The pointing finger," he whispered. "The culprit has revealed himself by his own impatience." He questioned the guests, observing their eyes, hands, and mannerisms. Finally, he focused on Mr. Reginald Pym, a seemingly calm gentleman who had been nervously twisting his ring during the entire inquiry. Father Brown asked casually, "Where were you standing when the shot was fired?" Pym hesitated. His finger twitched involuntarily, pointing toward the window. "Ah," said Father Brown quietly, "you have betrayed yourself. The finger always points where guilt lies." Confronted, Pym confessed. He had argued with Chase over a business matter. In a moment of anger, he had fired the gun, and then tried to stage the room to make it appear accidental. Yet in his anxiety, he left the finger-shaped indentation, and in his gestures he gave himself away. Valentin shook his head in wonder. "Father Brown, I never thought to see it." Father Brown replied simply, "It is not the eyes alone, Inspector, but the small signs of the human hand and conscience. The guilty hand betrays the heart." With that, the mystery of the pointing finger was solved, and justice quietly restored.
Chapter 13. The Blue Cross. The story opens on a busy Paris street where Father Brown, the small, unassuming Catholic priest, was carrying a very valuable item, the Blue Cross, a small silver reliquary of great significance. He had been warned that Flambeau, the notorious criminal, was in the city and might attempt to steal the cross. The priest, however, did not carry weapons nor had any guards. He relied solely on observation, intelligence, and a deep understanding of human nature. As he walked through the crowded streets, Father Brown noticed a man following him. The man was large, dressed in black, and moved with the furtive caution of a thief. It was Flambeau, though the priest did not need to confirm this. Father Brown smiled gently and continued walking, keeping his eyes subtly on the surrounding crowd. The man quickened his pace, attempting to close the distance, but Father Brown, seemingly distracted, led him through a series of twists and turns. Flambeau tried to seize the cross at the corner of a narrow street. Father Brown, still calm, stepped aside. The criminal grabbed the empty air. The priest had already switched the cross to his inner pocket. "You are clever, Flambeau," said Father Brown quietly, "but cleverness alone cannot overcome conscience." Flambeau stared. He had not expected anyone to anticipate his movements. The chase continued through the streets, Flambeau trying every trick he knew, and Father Brown staying one step ahead. Finally, in a quiet alley, Father Brown stopped. He turned and looked directly at Flambeau. "You have forgotten something," said the priest. "Even the cleverest criminal leaves traces in thought and movement. The cross is safe because you are predictable, Flambeau, not because you are careless, but because your very cleverness betrays you." Flambeau, exhausted and awed, surrendered. The cross remained unharmed, and the thief vanished quietly from the records of the city, his reputation intact, but his plans foiled. Father Brown walked away into the Parisian twilight, reflecting on the lesson. It is never the force that protects the innocent, nor the cunning that saves the guilty. It is understanding. The human heart betrays itself, and all that is needed is patience and insight to see it.
Chapter 14. The Secret Garden. It was a warm summer afternoon when Father Brown visited the English countryside to spend a few quiet days with a distant friend, Sir Arthur Latham, who owned a large estate with a beautiful garden. The estate was famous for its hidden corners, winding paths, and secluded nooks where flowers bloomed in profusion. Yet, despite the tranquility, there was unease among the household. Valuable items had gone missing from Sir Arthur's collection, and though nothing was stolen from the garden itself, the servants whispered of shadows moving among the hedges at dusk. Father Brown, curious as ever, offered to help. Walking through the garden, Father Brown observed the layout. A high stone wall separated the garden from the neighboring estate. A small summer house stood at one corner, almost hidden by climbing vines. A fountain bubbled quietly in the center, surrounded by fragrant flowers. "Nothing moves here unnoticed," Father Brown said softly, "and yet the guilty hand has been at work." Sir Arthur led him to the summer house, where a broken lock suggested that someone had been there. The priest examined the lock and the surrounding floor, noting tiny scratches that no ordinary visitor would leave. "Someone has entered and exited carefully, hiding their presence," he murmured. and yet they left a trail for those who know how to see. That evening, as the household gathered for dinner, Father Brown quietly observed the guests. Lady Emily, Sir Arthur's cousin, seemed distracted and nervous, frequently glancing toward the garden. The gardener appeared unusually anxious, his hands trembling as he cleared the table. A young visiting scholar walked with an uneven gait, stepping carefully yet deliberately. Father Brown's eyes settled on the scholar. "Observe him," he whispered. "Guilt is rarely loud. It hides in posture and hesitation, in the quietest movements." Later, when the household retired for the night, Father Brown followed the scholar through the garden. Near the summer house, he found the missing items carefully concealed behind a false panel. The scholar confessed. He had intended to steal a small collection of rare coins, but was caught in his own misjudgment. Father Brown, ever gentle, guided him toward restitution and reflection. Before leaving the estate the next morning, Father Brown reflected on the lesson. In the world, the most secret deeds leave traces in the most ordinary places. A careful eye, a patient mind, and the understanding of human nature can reveal what even the cleverest thief believes hidden. The garden was secret, yes, but the human heart leaves no corner truly unseen.
Chapter 15. The Honour of Israel Gow. In the shadowy streets of London, there existed a man known to all who dealt in crime, Israel Gow. He was a thief of the old school, a master of cunning, yet guided by an unusual code of honor. He would never betray a friend, nor harm the innocent, nor commit a crime that violated his peculiar moral rules. One evening, a wealthy merchant, Mr. Philip Stone, discovered that his most prized possession, a small jewel-encrusted box, was missing. He immediately suspected Gow, whose reputation for audacity was notorious. The police, too, believed Gow must be responsible. Yet Father Brown, quietly observing the scene, doubted the assumption. Gow's reputation, he reflected, made him an easy scapegoat. A clever man could exploit fear and expectation to commit the crime and frame Gow without him even being involved. Father Brown arranged to meet Israel Gow in his secret hideout. Gow, a tall, lean figure with sharp eyes and calm manners, greeted the priest with mild curiosity. "You think me guilty?" Gow asked, smiling faintly. "Not this time," Father Brown replied. "Someone has used your name and your reputation against you. They relied on the assumption that you would do what they themselves were doing." Gow listened intently as Father Brown explained the circumstances, noting the signs left by the true criminal. Footprints that were inconsistent with Gow's gait, objects misplaced to suggest Gow's presence, a false trail of witnesses and alibis. Together, they traced the deception to a cunning small-time crook who had hoped to profit by exploiting Gow's notoriety. The criminal had fled to a warehouse near the Thames. Using Gow's knowledge of the streets and Father Brown's insight into human behavior, they cornered the thief. Confronted, the man confessed, the jewel-encrusted box was recovered, and Gow's honor was restored. Before leaving, Gow turned to Father Brown. "You have a curious way of seeing truth," he said. "You understand that even men of crime live by principles, and that even principles can be misused by others." Father Brown smiled. "Yes, Israel Gow, and it is by understanding those principles that justice may quietly prevail." The story concluded with Father Brown reflecting on human nature, that even in the world of crime, honor and conscience leave traces, and those who understand them can discern guilt from reputation, truth from illusion.
Chapter 16. The Pointing Finger. It was late in the evening when Father Brown was summoned to the residence of Mr. Henry Carswell, a prosperous art dealer in London. A murder had occurred, and the circumstances were baffling. The victim, Mr. Malcolm Chase, had been found dead in his study. A single bullet had pierced his heart. The room was locked from the inside, and no weapon or clue was apparent. Inspector Valentine, a competent but non-imaginative officer, was in charge of the case.
He was perplexed and had gathered all potential suspects, family, servants, and guests. Yet none could explain the mysterious circumstances. Father Brown arrived quietly, observing the household carefully. "Explain to me," he said to Valentine, "what do you mean by suspicion?" Valentine gestured helplessly. Everyone here had opportunity and most had motive, but no one admits anything and no one saw anything. Father Brown nodded. Then the clue is not in what is seen, but in what is shown unwittingly. Crime always leaves gestures, signs that reveal the guilty even when all else is hidden. Examining the study, Father Brown noted small, telling details. A chair slightly displaced, a blotter moved aside on the desk, a finger-shaped indentation in the velvet of a chair cushion. "The pointing finger," he murmured. "Guilt often marks itself in the smallest actions, a twitch, a gesture, a touch. The guilty hand betrays the heart." He questioned the assembled guests subtly, watching their reactions. His attention soon focused on Mr. Reginald Pym, a seemingly calm gentleman whose nervous gestures betrayed him. Father Brown asked casually, "Where were you standing when the shot was fired?" Pym's finger twitched involuntarily, pointing toward the window. "There," said Father Brown, "you reveal the truth with your own hand." Confronted, Pym confessed. In a moment of anger over a financial dispute with Chase, he had fired the gun. Attempting to stage the scene as accidental, he overlooked the subtle marks left behind by his hand and gestures. Inspector Valentine was amazed. "Father Brown, how did you know?" Father Brown replied simply, "It is not the eyes alone that reveal guilt, Inspector, but the conscience written in posture, in movement, and in the smallest gestures. Even the cleverest criminal cannot hide the truth of his own hand." Thus the mystery of the pointing finger was solved, and justice quietly restored. Chapter 17. The Blue Cross. The story begins in Paris, where Father Brown found himself carrying a small but extremely valuable item, the Blue Cross, a silver reliquary of immense significance. Father Brown had been warned that the infamous criminal Flambeau was in the city and might attempt to steal the cross. The priest carried no weapon and had no guards, relying solely on his keen powers of observation and understanding of human nature. As he walked along the crowded Parisian streets, Father Brown noticed a man moving in his direction, large, dressed in black, and following carefully. This was Flambeau, though the priest did not need confirmation. Father Brown smiled and continued calmly, knowing the man would attempt to seize the cross at the first opportunity. Flambeau tried several tricks, but the priest anticipated each move. The streets twisted and turned, with Father Brown always one step ahead, making it appear as though he were unaware of the pursuit. Eventually, in a narrow alley, Flambeau made his attempt. He lunged at Father Brown, expecting the cross to be exposed, but the priest had already secured it safely in his inner coat pocket. "You are clever, Flambeau," said Father Brown softly, "but cleverness alone is not enough to overcome conscience." Flambeau, exhausted and surprised, realized he had been outwitted. Father Brown's understanding of human behavior and his calm patience had protected the cross without force. Flambeau, humbled, eventually surrendered to Father Brown's quiet authority. The cross remained safe, and the priest walked calmly away, reflecting on the lesson. It is not strength nor cunning that preserves the innocent nor punishes the guilty.
It is insight, patience, and an understanding of human nature. The guilty reveal themselves through their own actions, and the wise simply watch.
Chapter 18. The Secret Garden. During a warm summer afternoon, Father Brown visited the countryside to see his friend, Sir Arthur Latham, who owned a grand estate with a large, beautiful garden. This garden was renowned for its hidden corners, winding paths, and secluded spots where flowers grew in abundance. Yet, despite the peace and beauty, unease had settled over the household. Valuable items had gone missing from Sir Arthur's collection, and the servants whispered of shadows moving through the garden at dusk. Father Brown, curious and ever observant, offered his assistance. Walking through the garden, Father Brown carefully observed its features. A tall stone wall separated the garden from the neighboring property. A small summer house was almost hidden by climbing vines. A central fountain bubbled quietly, surrounded by fragrant flowers. "Nothing here moves unnoticed," he said softly, "yet someone has trespassed." Sir Arthur took him to the summer house, where a broken lock suggested recent entry. Father Brown examined the lock and noted tiny scratches on the floor, signs left by a careful intruder. "Someone has entered and left deliberately, trying to hide their movements," Father Brown whispered. That evening, Father Brown observed the household closely. Lady Emily, Sir Arthur's cousin, appeared distracted, constantly glancing at the garden. The gardener seemed anxious, his hands trembling while clearing the table. A young visiting scholar walked with an uneven, deliberate gait. "The thief," Father Brown murmured, "reveals himself in posture and hesitation. Guilt is rarely loud." Later, Father Brown followed the scholar through the garden. Near the summer house, he discovered the missing items concealed behind a false panel. The scholar confessed. He had intended to steal a small collection of rare coins, but Father Brown's insight had caught him in the act. Before leaving, Father Brown reflected. In all secret deeds, the smallest actions betray the heart. Even the most cunning criminal leaves traces. Observation and understanding reveal what even cleverness tries to hide. And so, the mystery of the secret garden was quietly resolved, justice restored, and the estate returned to peace.
Chapter 19. The Queer Feet. The story begins on a foggy London street, where a series of thefts had recently unsettled a wealthy household. Mr. Smithers, the master of the house, was concerned about the disappearance of valuable items, though nothing of great worth had been stolen. Still, the mystery perplexed both the family and the servants. The police were baffled. No doors had been forced, no windows broken, and yet the items vanished one by one. To everyone else, it seemed as though the thief had walked through walls. It was at this point that Father Brown was called to investigate. Father Brown quietly examined the house and observed subtle signs overlooked by others. Tiny scratches on the polished wooden floor, slight indentations on the carpet near doors, footsteps that did not match any servant or household member. "Someone has been here who does not belong," Father Brown said. "Their feet are queer. They move with intent, but also with caution, avoiding detection. They leave marks where we least expect." Mr. Smithers frowned. "Queer feet? What do you mean?" "Guilt is betrayed in the manner of movement. Even the most careful criminal cannot hide the shape of his conscience." That evening, Father Brown observed the household during dinner. Among the guests, he noted a young man whose steps were peculiar, each footfall slightly uneven, almost as though he were measuring the floor with careful calculation. "The thief is among us," whispered Father Brown.
the one who walks differently, whose movements betray a secret purpose. Sure enough, as the evening progressed, Father Brown saw the young man glance toward a side table, then subtly slip an object into his coat pocket. The priest followed quietly and intercepted him. "You have been taking the small items," Father Brown said gently. The young man, realizing he was caught, confessed. He admitted to stealing the objects out of curiosity and the thrill of testing his cleverness. Father Brown forgave him, but imparted a quiet lesson on conscience and honesty. Father Brown reflected, "It is not always the eyes that reveal guilt, nor the hands that commit the crime, but the feet that betray the heart. Even the quietest steps leave a trace for those who know how to watch." Thus, the mystery of the queer feet was solved, and the household returned to its usual calm, while Father Brown once again demonstrated that subtle observation often uncovers the truth.
Chapter 20. The Flying Stars. It was the first night of the annual gathering of the 12 True Fishermen, a private society of English gentlemen devoted to angling, held in the quiet seaside town of Rye. The dinner took place in the grand hall of the Vernon Hotel, and the guests were arriving in formal procession, dressed for the occasion. Among the attendees was Father Brown, small and unassuming, invited not for status or wealth, but for his keen insight into human nature. The conversation began with fishing techniques, bait, and local rivers, yet Father Brown's attention wandered to subtle signs in the hall. Servants moving silently with trays, the flicker of candlelight on polished silver, the unusual nervousness of one guest, a tall man in black, whose composure seemed forced. During the meal, a commotion arose. The flying stars, a set of rare and brilliantly cut jewels, were missing. Panic spread among the 12 True Fishermen, as such theft was unprecedented. Father Brown observed carefully. One man's hand trembled slightly while raising a glass. Another's eyes constantly scanned the room, though no one entered. The tall man in black remained outwardly calm, yet his footsteps were peculiar, slightly uneven, deliberate, and careful. "The thief walks differently," Father Brown whispered. "Observe the posture, the hesitations, the movements. Guilt always leaves a trace." Later, the tall man in black attempted to leave through a side corridor. Father Brown intercepted him quietly. "You have the flying stars," the priest said softly. The man's face changed. I don't know what you mean," he stammered. "You walked as though the floor were alive, trying to hide your guilt. Cleverness alone cannot mask conscience." Overcome by his own actions, the man confessed. He had been hired to steal the jewels and frame the society, relying on their trust and his knowledge of their routines. Father Brown retrieved the flying stars, returning them to astonished guests. As the night ended, Father Brown reflected, "Crime is rarely perfect. The guilty reveal themselves not in what they do, but in the way they do it. Observe the subtle signs, the hands, the steps, the gestures, and the truth becomes clear. Even in high society, human nature cannot be disguised." Thus the mystery of the flying stars was resolved, and Father Brown once again demonstrated that careful observation and insight into the human heart reveal the hidden truth.
Chapter 21. The Oracle of the Dog. One misty evening in the English countryside, Father Brown was summoned to the home of Sir John Radcliffe, a wealthy baronet with a collection of rare animals and curiosities.
Among them was a remarkable hound named Cerberus, famed for its intelligence and uncanny instincts. Many called the dog the Oracle of the Dog for its extraordinary ability to sense danger and deceit. Sir John was worried. "Father Brown," he said, "I fear a theft is imminent in my household. Cerberus has been restless for days, barking at shadows and refusing to enter certain rooms. But no one sees anything. I need your help." Father Brown, ever calm, nodded. "Dogs are rarely wrong, Sir John. If Cerberus is disturbed, there is cause. Let us observe carefully." That evening, Father Brown watched the household quietly. Among the visitors was a young man of elegant but nervous appearance. Cerberus stiffened whenever he approached, growling softly and circling him with suspicion. Father Brown noted the subtle signs: the man's glances towards the display of jewels, his restless hands and nervous posture, his uneven, deliberate steps across the room. "Even the cleverest thief," Father Brown said quietly, "leaves traces for those who know how to see." Later, when the guests retired, Father Brown followed the young man toward the room containing the jewels. There, near the display case, the priest caught him attempting to conceal the stolen items. "You have taken these treasures," Father Brown said softly. The young man, realizing he had been caught, confessed. He had intended to steal a collection of valuable jewels, but had underestimated both human observation and the dog's instincts. Father Brown smiled. "Sometimes the wisest of creatures, and the simplest, reveal the truth that humans try to hide. Conscience, like instinct, leaves a trace." The items were returned safely. Cerberus relaxed, and Sir John thanked Father Brown for his insight. Once again, the priest demonstrated that careful observation and understanding of human and animal nature reveal hidden truths, even in the most mysterious of circumstances. Chapter 22. The Wrong Shape. One afternoon, Father Brown was called to the house of Mr. Samuel Perkins, a wealthy collector of rare and curious objects. Mr. Perkins was hosting a small gathering to display his latest acquisition, an exquisitely carved ivory idol of mysterious origin. Its small but intricate form had drawn attention from scholars and collectors alike. During the event, one guest, Mr. Lionel Faraday, lingered near the idol, studying it with more interest than politeness allowed. Father Brown, quietly observing, noticed Faraday's gaze linger on the base of the idol and his hands twitch nervously as he adjusted his coat. Later, Mr. Perkins discovered the idol missing. Panic swept the household. Servants were questioned, guests searched, yet no one knew where the idol had gone. Father Brown, calm as ever, examined the room. A chair slightly displaced, a blotter on the desk shifted, a subtle indentation on the velvet surface of a nearby chair. "Observe the wrong shapes," Father Brown murmured. "Even the cleverest thief leaves traces in the shape of their movements and gestures. Conscience, however faint, betrays them." Later that evening, Father Brown followed Mr. Faraday discreetly. The young man approached a secluded corner, carefully removing the idol from his coat. The priest intercepted him gently. "You have taken this idol," Father Brown said. Faraday hesitated, then confessed. He had intended to study the idol more closely, but did not plan to harm it or keep it permanently. Father Brown noted a small crack on the base, caused by Faraday's careless handling. "You see," said Father Brown, "even innocent intentions leave marks. The wrong shape in action reveals the truth. Let this guide your conscience as much as your curiosity." The idol was returned to Mr. Perkins. Faraday learned a quiet lesson in honesty, and Father Brown reflected, "In every deed, no matter how subtle, human nature reveals itself. Observe closely, and even the clever can be understood. Crime and innocence alike leave signs in the shapes we make."
Chapter 23. The Honour of Israel Gow. In the shadowy streets of London, Israel Gow was a man known to all in the world of crime. He was a master thief, skilled in cunning and deception, yet bound by a peculiar code of honor. Gow would never betray a friend, harm the innocent, or violate his personal moral rules, even in the pursuit of crime. One evening, Mr. Philip Stone, a wealthy merchant, discovered that a prized jewel-encrusted box had been stolen. All suspicion immediately fell upon Gow, whose reputation as a daring criminal was notorious. The police were convinced he was guilty. Yet Father Brown, quietly observing the case, doubted this assumption. He recognized that Gow's reputation made him the perfect scapegoat. A clever thief could easily exploit this and commit the crime while framing Gow. Father Brown arranged to meet Israel Gow in his hideout. Gow, tall and lean with sharp eyes and calm demeanor, greeted the priest with curiosity. "You think me guilty?" Gow asked with a faint smile. "Not this time," Father Brown replied. "Someone has used your reputation against you. The real thief relied on the fear and expectation that you would commit the crime." Father Brown explained the subtle signs left by the true criminal: footprints inconsistent with Gow's gait, misplaced objects designed to suggest Gow's presence, a carefully staged trail of witnesses and alibis. Using Gow's knowledge of the criminal underworld, Father Brown tracked the real thief to a warehouse near the Thames. The culprit confessed upon confrontation, revealing the stolen box, which was returned safely. Gow, his honor restored, turned to Father Brown. "You understand, Father, that even men of crime live by rules, yet even these rules can be misused by others." "Yes, Israel Gow," said Father Brown, smiling, "and understanding those rules is how justice quietly prevails." The story concluded with Father Brown reflecting that even in the criminal world, honor and conscience leave traces, and that careful observation can discern truth from reputation, justice from deception.
Chapter 24. The Pointing Finger. One evening, Father Brown was summoned to the house of Mr. Henry Carswell, a London art dealer, regarding a mysterious death. The victim, Mr. Malcolm Chase, had been discovered dead in his study. A single bullet had pierced his heart. The room was locked from the inside. No weapon or clue was visible. Inspector Valentin was in charge, but baffled. He gathered the household, family, guests, and servants, but no one could explain the strange circumstances. Father Brown arrived quietly and asked Valentin to describe the situation. "Everyone here had opportunity, and most had motive," said the inspector. "Yet no one admits anything, and no one saw anything." Father Brown observed the room. "Then the clue lies not in what is seen, but in what is unwittingly shown. Even the guilty cannot hide every gesture." Examining the study, Father Brown noticed subtle signs: a slightly displaced chair, a blotter moved on the desk, a finger-shaped indentation on a velvet chair. "The pointing finger," he murmured. "Guilt reveals itself in the smallest actions. A twitch, a gesture, a posture. The guilty hand betrays the heart." Focusing on Mr. Reginald Pym, Father Brown asked, "Where were you standing when the shot was fired?" Pym's finger twitched involuntarily towards the window. "There," said Father Brown, "you betray yourself." Confronted, Pym confessed. A moment of anger over a financial dispute had led him to fire the gun. Attempting to stage the scene as accidental, he overlooked the small marks his own hand and gestures left behind. Inspector Valentin was astonished. "It is not the eyes alone that reveal guilt, Inspector, but conscience, written in posture, movement, and gesture. Even the cleverest cannot hide the truth of their own hand." Thus, the mystery of the pointing finger was solved, and justice quietly restored.
Chapter 25. The Blue Cross. In Paris, Father Brown carried a small but extremely valuable item, the Blue Cross, a silver reliquary of great significance. He had been warned that the infamous criminal Flambeau was in the city and might attempt to steal it. Father Brown carried no weapon and had no guards, relying entirely on his calm observation and deep understanding of human nature. As he walked through the crowded streets, he noticed a man following him, large, dressed in black, moving cautiously. This was Flambeau, though the priest did not need confirmation. Father Brown continued calmly, anticipating the thief's attempts. Flambeau tried several tricks, but Father Brown always stayed one step ahead, turning the chase through winding streets into a subtle game of anticipation. Eventually, Flambeau lunged in a narrow alley, expecting to seize the cross, but Father Brown had already secured it in his inner pocket. "You are clever, Flambeau," said Father Brown quietly, "but cleverness alone cannot overcome conscience." Flambeau, exhausted and surprised, realized he had been outwitted by patience and insight rather than force. Humbled, Flambeau surrendered to Father Brown's quiet authority. The cross remained safe, and the priest walked away, reflecting on the lesson. It is not strength nor cunning that preserves the innocent, nor punishes the guilty. It is observation, patience, and understanding human nature. The guilty reveal themselves through their own actions, and the wise simply watch. Thus ended the tale of the Blue Cross, a story of cleverness foiled not by force, but by insight into human behavior.
Chapter 26. The Secret Garden. One summer afternoon, Father Brown visited the countryside to see his friend Sir Arthur Latham, owner of a large estate with a beautiful, expansive garden. The garden was known for its hidden corners, winding paths, and secluded spots where flowers bloomed freely. Despite its beauty, the household was uneasy. Valuable items had gone missing from Sir Arthur's collection, and the servants whispered of shadows moving through the garden at dusk. Father Brown, ever observant, offered to assist. Walking through the garden, he examined it carefully. A tall stone wall separated it from neighboring property. A small summer house was hidden by climbing vines. A central fountain bubbled quietly, surrounded by flowers. "Nothing moves here unnoticed," Father Brown whispered, "yet someone has trespassed." Sir Arthur showed him the summer house, where a broken lock suggested forced entry. Father Brown examined the floor and noticed tiny scratches, clear signs of careful movement. "Someone entered and left deliberately, attempting to conceal their presence," Father Brown said. That evening, he observed the household. Lady Emily, Sir Arthur's cousin, seemed distracted, glancing repeatedly toward the garden. The gardener appeared anxious, trembling while clearing the table. A young visiting scholar walked carefully, deliberately, almost measuring each step. "The guilty reveal themselves in posture and hesitation," Father Brown murmured. Following the scholar later, Father Brown discovered the missing items hidden behind a false panel in the summer house. The scholar confessed to attempting theft out of curiosity and thrill. Father Brown guided him toward restitution and reflection. Before departing, Father Brown reflected, "In every secret deed, the human heart leaves traces. Even the cleverest criminal cannot erase all signs. Observation and understanding reveal what even cunning tries to hide." Thus the mystery of the secret garden was solved, and peace returned to the estate.
Chapter 27. The Queer Feet. In foggy London, a series of minor thefts had disturbed the household of Mr. Smithers, a wealthy gentleman. Though no valuables of great worth were taken, the disappearances baffled both servants and police. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken doors or windows, yet objects vanished as if by magic. The police were puzzled, calling the phenomenon inexplicable. Father Brown was invited to investigate. Walking through the house, he observed subtle clues overlooked by others. Tiny scratches on polished wooden floors, slight indentations on the carpet near doors, footsteps that did not match any known servant or guest. "Someone walks here who does not belong," Father Brown said quietly. "Their feet are queer. They move with purpose, yet attempt to hide their passage. Even a careful thief leaves traces." During dinner, Father Brown observed the guests. He noted a young man with peculiar movements, each step uneven, deliberate, and carefully measured. "The thief is among us," Father Brown whispered, "the one who walks differently, whose movements betray a secret purpose." Later, the young man was caught attempting to slip a small object into his coat. He confessed, admitting curiosity and the thrill of testing his cleverness, though he meant no serious harm. Father Brown guided him toward honesty and restitution. Father Brown reflected, "It is not the eyes or hands alone that reveal guilt, but the feet that betray the heart. Even the quietest steps leave traces for those who know how to watch." Thus, the mystery of the queer feet was solved, and the household returned to calm, with Father Brown's keen observation once again uncovering the truth hidden in human behavior.
Chapter 28. The Flying Stars. The tale begins at the annual gathering of the 12 True Fishermen, a society of English gentlemen devoted to angling, held in the seaside town of Rye. The dinner was hosted in the grand hall of the Vernon Hotel, and the guests arrived in formal attire. Among them was Father Brown, invited for his insight into human nature rather than social status or wealth. During the evening, a commotion arose. The flying stars, a collection of rare and brilliantly cut jewels, had vanished. Panic spread among the 12 True Fishermen, as such a theft was unprecedented. Father Brown observed carefully. One man's hand trembled while raising a glass. Another's eyes constantly scanned the room. A tall man in black remained outwardly calm, but his steps were deliberate and uneven. "The thief walks differently," Father Brown whispered. "Guilt leaves traces in posture, gestures, and movement." Later, the tall man attempted to leave via a side corridor. Father Brown intercepted him. "You have the flying stars," said the priest softly. The man's face betrayed him, and he confessed. He had been hired to steal the jewels and frame the society, relying on insider knowledge. Father Brown recovered the flying stars and returned them to the astonished guests. As the evening ended, Father Brown reflected. Crime is rarely perfect. The guilty reveal themselves not in what they do, but in how they do it. Observe the subtle signs, the hands, the steps, the gestures, and the truth becomes clear. Even in high society, human nature cannot be disguised. Thus, the mystery of the flying stars was solved, and once again, Father Brown demonstrated that insight and observation, rather than force, uncover the truth.
Chapter 29. The Oracle of the Dog. One misty evening in the English countryside, Father Brown was summoned to the home of Sir John Radcliffe, a wealthy baronet known for his collection of rare animals and curiosities. Among them was a remarkable hound named Cerberus, famed for its intelligence and keen instincts. Many called the dog the Oracle of the Dog for its ability to detect danger and deceit. Sir John was anxious. "Father Brown," he said, "I fear a theft in my household.
Cerberus has been restless for days, barking at shadows and refusing to enter certain rooms, yet no one sees anything. I need your help." Father Brown, ever calm, replied, "Dogs are rarely wrong, Sir John. If Cerberus is disturbed, there is cause. Let us observe closely." That evening, Father Brown observed the household. Among the visitors was a young man of elegant but nervous appearance. Cerberus stiffened whenever he approached, growling softly and circling him with suspicion. Father Brown noted subtle signs: glances toward the display of jewels, nervous, restless hands, uneven, deliberate steps across the room. "Even the cleverest thief leaves traces," said Father Brown quietly. "The guilty cannot hide all signs." Later, Father Brown followed the young man toward the room containing the jewels. There, the priest caught him attempting to conceal the stolen items. "You have taken these treasures," Father Brown said calmly. The young man, realizing he was caught, confessed. He had intended to steal a collection of valuable jewels, but had underestimated both human observation and the dog's instincts. The items were safely returned, Cerberus relaxed, and Sir John thanked Father Brown. The priest reflected. Often the wisest creatures, and even the simplest, reveal the truth humans try to hide. Conscience, like instinct, always leaves a trace. Thus, the mystery of the Oracle of the Dog was resolved, with Father Brown once again demonstrating that careful observation of human and animal behavior uncovers the hidden truth.
Chapter 30. The Wrong Shape. One afternoon, Father Brown visited the home of Mr. Samuel Perkins, a wealthy collector of rare and curious objects. Mr. Perkins was hosting a small gathering to display his latest acquisition, an exquisitely carved ivory idol of mysterious origin. Its delicate form had attracted attention from scholars and collectors alike. Among the guests was Mr. Lionel Faraday, who lingered near the idol, studying it intently. Father Brown noticed Faraday's eyes and hands, subtle but revealing signs of intense interest. Later, Mr. Perkins discovered that the idol was missing. Panic spread through the household. Servants searched, guests were questioned, but the object had vanished. Father Brown examined the room. A slightly displaced chair, a blotter moved on the desk, a subtle indentation on a velvet chair. "Observe the wrong shapes," Father Brown murmured. "Even the cleverest thief leaves traces in gestures and movements. Conscience betrays the guilty." That evening, Father Brown discreetly followed Mr. Faraday. The young man approached a secluded corner and removed the idol from his coat. Father Brown intercepted him gently. "You have taken this idol," Father Brown said. Faraday hesitated, then confessed. He had intended to study it more closely, not to keep or destroy it. Father Brown noted a small crack on the base, caused by Faraday's carelessness. "You see," said Father Brown, "even innocent intentions leave marks. The wrong shape in action reveals the truth. Let this guide your conscience." The idol was returned safely, and Faraday learned a lesson in honesty. Father Brown reflected. In every action, human nature leaves traces. Observation reveals what even cleverness tries to hide. Crime and innocence alike leave shapes that speak truth. Thus, the mystery of the wrong shape was resolved, and Father Brown's insight once again restored order and understanding.